All right. Thank you, Shanti Garba. And hello, everyone. Hi. Yeah. Yeah. Good evening or good afternoon or good day, wherever you are in the long now of infinite space-time. My name is Nico again. Thank you for that introduction. And I'll also just name really quick that I am also a medicine path practitioner. So I practice in the lineage of the Medicine Path Native American Church, which is largely informed by Lakota traditions. That'll be coming into the talk today, and I just wanted to give them a shout out. Yeah, I'm feeling very honored to be here and be a small part of hosting our time together today. So thank you. Welcome. And keep it real. I wasn't sure who would come to a Friday night talk on climate grief. You know what I'm saying? It's not exactly a common Friday night thing to do. And to see all of you here, I am grateful and humbled. It feels affirming, like maybe this work is relevant and needed. So just to give you a sense of the flow for the next 40 minutes or so, I'm thinking we might begin with a meditation, just a brief meditation, like 5 to 10 minutes, just to ground ourselves here in this weekend, in this conversation. And then I'll share a little bit about my work as an artist, maybe offer some light framing or reframing around grief as it relates to climate change. I'm thinking we might do like a really quick writing exercise, and then we'll talk. We'll be in a conversation. It won't exactly happen in that order, I'm guessing, but those are the elements, and then we'll see what happens. Before we get started, I'd like to name a couple of what I like to call premises of play. So these are just soft invitations, maybe aspirations that have the potential to help creatively hold us in playing with new ideas for the next 30 minutes. So first, while doing my best to observe trauma-informed practices, this is not exactly what I would call a safe space, just to be clear. Okay, we're intentionally talking about grief and fear, and there is a good chance the nervous system will get activated in some way, maybe. To borrow language I heard from the National Equity Project, though, I would, however, call this a necessary space. This is necessary work. It involves risk and vulnerability. So my first invitation is just for you to generously take care of yourself, whatever that means for you. Generously take care of yourself. We're on Zoom. Feel free to stretch, drink water, eat food, turn off your camera. You know what I mean? Casual. Second premise of play here is slowness. I would like to invite all of us into some slow work. A lot of my thinking around climate grief is inspired by Dr. Bayo Akomolafe, who I have the privilege to call a dear friend and maybe a mentor. Well, I don't know how he'd feel about me calling him a mentor, but Bayo, he says the times are urgent. We need to slow down. I'd like to invite an orientation of there being no agenda today, no urgency for us to land in any conclusion, solution, insight, to-do list. If you have any answers by the end of this talk, that means I have ceremoniously failed again. Mm. And then the last thing here, not to get too abstract in the first couple of minutes, but I'm also inviting our capacity to hold paradox this evening, to hold two competing ideas or a truth that doesn't seem to make any logical sense. And I just want to name this because it can be really challenging to process grief or talk about climate issues without touching paradox. Yeah. So I might say something or offer a reframing of climate catastrophe, and the embodied response could be like, that sounds wrong, but it feels true, or that sounds true, but it doesn't quite or feel right. You know what I mean? A paradox takes the right, wrong, good, bad binary and warps the boundary. And that's really the territory we'll be exploring and the context for my work, which is all to say that the invitation is here for you to take what you need and leave the rest behind. Take what you need, if anything, leave the rest. Okay, so let's get started. Yeah, I'd like to make some space to, I'd like to make some space to arrive together with a short grounding meditation. But I'd like to share a story first, just to frame the practice and, maybe this entire conversation. Yeah. So I'm a fellow at the Garrison Institute. And in the fellowship program, we once had the privilege, the utter delight, really, to speak with Joanna Macy in a small group. She's one of my all-time heroes. If you don't know who she is, Joanna Macy is low-key kind of like Mother Teresa to me. She's basically the godmother of the environmental movement, a lifelong activist. She's an eco-philosopher, an author, a deep Dharma practitioner, a poet. I think she's one of the world's foremost Rilke translators. She's just like magic wrapped in a human body. Now, I forget what question she was responding to, but we started to talk about the state of the world, and the conversation got super heavy, super fast. She painted a very bleak picture. She went on about the self-destructive political economy, these like multiple overlapping ecological and social crises. She was saying there's a really good chance we fail at moving from an industrial growth society to a life-sustaining civilization. It got really fucking dark. And then in the exact same breath, she said, "And I am so excited to be alive." Now, mind you, Joanna Macy is 93 years old and has more energy than my 6-year-old niece, right? Like the lucidity and love and joy radiating from her presence is just profound. So she said, "I am so excited to be alive." And then she went on, and not just me, but every being on every planet and every being on every plane of existence that knows about Earth is excited for this moment. This is the time. I lived through most of the 20th century, and this is the moment to be alive. And when she was done, I couldn't help myself. I had to ask. I was like, but why? Why would any being on any plane of existence be excited to be on Earth right now? It's miserable here, And then she smiled at me, maybe like an elder would, and she said quite simply and beautifully, "Because we have a chance to matter. Because we have a chance to identify with life itself." Joy shines in the dark. Hmm. Yes. Apologies for that. Thank you. So let's sit to let's sit for a few moments. Maybe just touch into this sense of aliveness together. We'll drop into a conversation. So we'll sit for briefly, just 5 to 7 minutes, and start and stop with the sound of this bell. Being Finding a posture feels like it'll be comfortable. So allowing the attention to turn inward in whatever way feels supportive to you. Could be softening the gaze or closing the eyelids. And keeping in mind all of the guidance here is totally optional. And the real invitation is for you to generously take care of yourself. And that said, if it's comfortable, maybe opening with a couple deeper breaths at your own pace. And I invite us to begin slowly. Really take our time to arrive in this moment of practice. And really, I invite you to arrive with whatever's here for you today. Could be news of the war raging on, Well, for me in the US, it's been a week of mass shootings. Could be climate disequilibrium. Or it could be, a beautiful winter day, um, or a meal that you enjoyed. Or you might be feeling sleepy. Whatever's here for you. All of it is welcome. And to maybe help with grounding or continuing to arrive slowly, I invite you to gently turn the attention to any sense of aliveness in the body. So, all of the life here, you might even imagine our basic biology. Yeah, neurons are firing right now. The heart is pumping, the lungs are breathing. There is life here. You may be feeling any sense of aliveness in the face, letting the attention gather there by the face. Might feel any warmth, or maybe the brow is furrowed or the eyelids are closed tight. Maybe the jaw is clenched a little. On your next exhale, I invite you to maybe begin softening, inviting some softness into the brow, softening the eyelids, the jaw. Maybe letting the attention travel downward to the shoulders. Great historians of the body. Sensing any aliveness there. Breathing out and softening the shoulders. And maybe letting the attention travel to the chest and the belly. Sensing any aliveness in the organs. And on your next exhale, softening the chest, the belly, the back body. Hmm. As much as possible as we move today, letting the whole body be soft. Whenever you're ready, just allowing the eyes to gently open again. Some folks couldn't hear the bell, so take your time coming back. Okay, cool. Thank you for that, everyone. I was feeling a little nervous. It was helpful. Um, so again, for the translators, I'll do my best to take breaks and move a little slower. Thank you for the note. Okay, so where to begin? Hmm. In that same conversation, Joanna Macy also said, "This present moment is enough because this present moment is the only time you can act." Yeah, what a particular moment to be alive and to be at something like this. Oh, truly, truly thank you for your willingness to show up here like that. Thank you to the Triratna Earth Sangha. I'd like to spend a little time now framing what I mean by grief, and more specifically, climate grief, as a way to maybe offer some context for the work I do, and to intentionally invite some of that energy into the space as a welcomed guest. Mm, this journey began for me exactly 6 years ago in some ways. It's interesting. Today is the anniversary of my older cousin, who's really more like my older brother, passing. Yeah, he died 6 years ago to the day. And at the time, I was already in a period of intense grieving. Mm. In very quick succession, I lost three people who were close to me. My other cousin, his younger brother, went back to prison. Trump was elected president, and Kanye West was wearing MAGA hats. For those of you who know Kanye West and follow pop culture like that, it was kind of like a precursor to him jumping off the anti-Semitic deep end. What I'm saying is, it was a challenging time, especially for those of us who grew up on The College Dropout, if you know rap music. Uh, then I came across that spectacularly catastrophist piece of literature by David Wallace Wells, the Uninhabitable Earth. Yeah. And I just fell apart. I mean, the picture was so bleak. And that's when I really leaned into practice. You know, I started learning all I could about grief. I sat many ceremonies. I was in all manner of therapy. I was in trainings and studying, and all of it was pretty helpful. And then, the pandemic happened. And over here in the States, George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, and then wildfires and mass shootings and the January 6th political insurrection and more police killings, and then the war, and then Uvalde and Tulsa and South Philly. And then my entire family got COVID, you know, and I was like, yo, universe, can we chill with the suffering for a second? You know, yeah, I don't think it would be hyperbolic to say grief has been a recurring energetic pattern in our lives the last couple of years, at least. You know, we've been visited so regularly by grief. It is densely atmospheric, you know, ever present to the point where I can barely recognize it as a distinct experience happening. And we've all experienced grief, but it's one of those words we might all define differently. So grief is maybe what happens when there is a sudden loss. Could be of a loved one, a memory, an identity, an ecosystem. It's broadly associated or sometimes conflated with sadness or sorrow, you know, the pain of loss. Sometimes there's anger and frustration. Sometimes there is a blanket numbness. For me, I think about grief as coming from the root word gravis, you know, which is the same root as gravity or gravitas. It means the terrestrial phenomenon of weight. You know, there's a weightiness to grief, which is to say grief brings us closer to earth. And we're not always ready for that. Grief spills, you know, it's what happens when pain is truly witnessed. As Francis Weller says, who's another big inspiration for me. By its very nature, grief confirms worth. It says, this is worth crying over. It brings us into relationship with a full spectrum of aliveness, you know, a life that includes death and dying and paradox and mystery, which is not always an easy place to be, especially in a cultural context where we distance ourselves from death and dying quite rigorously. So what is climate grief? It's another hard thing to define. It does have to do with loss, but it's not just a sudden loss, right? There's a long exposure to ecological destruction. It's the context we're living in. As much as possible, I try to distinguish grief, fear, anger, and sadness. You know, I mean, as much as we can. Of course, they're all related, but perhaps we can say when it comes to climate change, there is anger and maybe guilt or shame about what has happened and what has been lost. There is fear and anxiety about what will happen, what could be lost. And there is a deep sorrow or sadness about what is happening, what is being lost, a kind of despondency that grows from feeling helpless or hopeless in the present moment. And sometimes grief is what we call experiencing that entire matrix. And it's also something distinct. Does that kind of make sense for folks? Yeah. Thank you for the nonverbal affirmations. I appreciate that. Zoom experience. Okay, so for me, grief isn't always at the surface, you know, and the scope of climate collapse is so wide, so unintelligible. My brain kind of just short circuits. So to present some of what we're actually looking at in a more visceral way, I want to briefly guide us through a few images and invite all of us to do a quick written reflection just to bring the energy of grief into the space. And then we'll kind of use that as a way to contextualize the work that I do and the art installations and the rest of our conversation. Okay. Before we start, maybe we can just take a couple deeper community breaths together, as we're going to be looking at some images here. So I'm going to count to 3, and then we'll all breathe in for 3. We'll hold it for 3, and we'll breathe out for 3, and we'll do that 3 times. A lot of 3s. Okay. So on 3. 1, 2, 3. Breathing in. 2, 3. Holding. 2, and breathing out. One more time, breathing in. 3, holding. And breathing out. And breathing in one more time. Holding. And breathing out. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen here. Not what I wanted to share. Okay. Does everyone see an image of a woman pouring water? Okay. So this is from Natalie Diaz, a poet. She says, "We think of our bodies as being all that we are. I am my body. This thinking helps us disrespect water, air, land, one another. But water is not external from our body, ourself. My elder says, cut off your ear and you will live. Cut off your hand, you will live. Cut off your leg, you can still live. Cut off our water, we will not live more than a week." So you know the story. Everyone here knows the story. We are looking at a global shortage of available drinking water. Severe drought and the desiccation of old forest groves. Yeah. Magical beings like orangutans and koalas near extinction. We're looking at sea level rise, floods, the displacement of our most vulnerable populations, usually Black, brown, and indigenous communities first, right? Tens of millions of possible climate refugees, melting permafrost, pandemics, wildfires, river pollution, toxic, unbreathable air. And the water we drink, like the air we breathe, is not a part of our body, but is our body. What we do to one, to the body, to the water, we do to the other. It's also from Natalie Diaz. So maybe just take a breath. Take a moment to sense into whatever it is you're feeling in the body. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's some tightness in the chest or in the throat. Yeah. And then I invite you to bring whatever's here into this writing prompt, which is really the the question that informs my work and that I continue to sit with. So what is the story that grief is telling? Imagine grief is a heavenly messenger and you're the only person that can interpret the language being shared. What did the grief tell you? Okay. If you have something to write with or you're at your computer, put that question in the chat. I invite you to just take a couple of minutes, whatever's here, if anything at all, just write down what comes to mind. Be a way to kind of presence us into the next bit of this conversation. I'm going to share a little music while we do this, so it's in the background.
I wanna be free, so free, like a feather blowing through the breeze, like a bird in a tree, like a dolphin in the sea. I wanna fly high, so high, like an eagle in the sky. And when my time has come, I'll let it all go with a sigh. Pachamama, coming home to the place where I belong. Pachamama, coming home to the place where I belong. I wanna be free, be me, be the holy being that I see. Not to rise and not to fall, be at one with love and all. There is no high, no low, there's nowhere else to go except inside. Open up your heart and be just who you are. Pachamama, coming home to the place where I belong. Pachamama, coming home to the place where I belong. Pachamama, coming home to the place where I belong. Pachamama, coming home to the place where I belong.
Okay, wherever you are in the reflection, feel free to keep going if you want to. I'm going to keep moving along here because we do exist in linear time. Yeah, so when sitting in the unimaginable scope of climate collapse, one of the questions that came up for me through grief was, is there a response adequate to what has already been lost? Like, forget the future orientation about what to do. Like, is there a response adequate to what has already been lost? How might I honor the speaking voice of grief? How do I reintroduce the possibility of some collective ritual for holding grief, just grief? Yeah, what was coming up for me was the world of questions underneath the one that usually gets asked in eco-justice spaces. Like, what do I do? What action do I take? How do I take action? So at the end of 2020, I was I was commissioned by the Smithsonian and then later Yerba Buena Center for the Arts to develop a multimedia installation for a wider exhibit called Good Grief. And what I eventually came to was a series of large-scale site-specific altars or shrines, as I hear you call them in the UK. So no ritual sacrifice involved with the altars, to be clear. Yeah, with some dear friends and collaborators, specifically Eli Marienthal. We built these large-scale altars or shrine portals made out of locally foraged, sourced, and borrowed materials as a consciously failing attempt to answer some of those questions. So I'll share my screen again just to show you what I'm talking about. Yeah. So here's one of the first ones we did with the Smithsonian. This is at the abandoned zoo here in Los Angeles, California, and was at one point a polar bear cave because humans are ridiculous. um, and these were really designed, uh, intended as the humble offering of someone who didn't know what to do. They were designed as a place where grief was welcome. This is specifically dedicated to the loss of animals, and they were also really designed. That's my niece right there. That's my little niece, who was also a major part of building this altar. Yeah, but they were also really designed as a way to physically step out of the hubris of thinking we can save the world, right? People often joke that the world will be fine. It's the humans that are in for a rough ride. But I would say even more than that, the idea that we can save the world, quote unquote, assumes there is a coherent, static world out there for us to save. Anthropogenic climate disaster is a concept that relies on a division of humans and nature. It relies on the human as a normative subject and at the center of what is happening, like we are not also an expression of nature, or like nature itself is even a stable concept, like there aren't more than human forces at play. These altars, so this altar was also designed as a way for people to come through and take whatever they wanted from the altar to go make their own altars. Right? This was another altar we did at YBCA, a little different, but same deal. We kind of built the structure ourselves. That was about 800 pounds of Yuba River rocks, and then different artifacts from different traditions for people to come and pray with, really, or do whatever their practice is with. Yeah, these altars kind of said, let me do my best to tend to what is right here, to make a humble offering back into the web of life. They are an expression of don't know mind, beginner's mind. In my practice, what they call the technology of the altar helps to transmute fear into love. Right? The altar, the shrine is an ancient future technology, as they say, that was gifted. It wasn't invented. And it works really simply. You sit in front of this portal. You maybe get quiet for a second and breathe or do whatever, occurs for you to do. You can sing, laugh, cry, talk. and the altar itself begins an alchemical process. And the beautiful thing about an altar, there's supposed to be one more picture, but that's cool. The beautiful thing about an altar is everyone kind of knows what to do in that space, you know. Um, hold on one second. Screens. Yeah, everyone kind of knows what to do in the space of an altar. It's part of a shared human vocabulary. Mm, when we left that first altar up at the park and kind of just watched as people interacted with it, you know, and some people did the Instagram thing, other people got quiet and made bouquets. One young woman didn't know how she ended up in that part of the park, but she said she was called there and had just lost her best friend a couple days earlier. You know, like, I'm finding the more that I build altars, they create an energetic field for people where we might be able to relate to grief as an ally. And that really brings me to my last point here. So another quick thing I want to say about grief. Shanti Garba, are we cool on time if I say one more thing about grief here? Okay. Thanks for your attention, everyone. Yeah, so, you know, grief in the Western psychological framework is often related to, I don't know what I mean by the Western psychological framework, but you know what I'm saying, is often related to as something to get over or get through. You know, there is a progress model. There's something better on the other side. For me, even the way that I talk about this though is a bit of a misnomer. I'm not actually here, as I say, to process grief. I'm here to let grief process me. I'm here to get out of its way, to be a welcoming presence. You know, grief in my experience is what prepares the body to meet the sacred. Where sacred is just treating something or someone the way it wants to be treated. Climate grief, you might say, is preparing the body to be in sacred relationship to the web of life in which we are already entangled. These altars that I build are pieces of technology to help augment that process. From the perspective of embodied interbeing, the perspective in which we are just the world worlding itself. The thing we call climate collapse is just a description of what it feels like to treat yourself the way you don't like to be treated. Does that make sense? Right? It's the confusion of not knowing how to stop. And it's the fear of projecting into a future that feels like treating yourself that way won't ever stop. Many of us are so deeply embedded in systems that make it so challenging to be in sacred relationship with water, with animals, with each other. You know, climate collapse from this perspective is really just a delusion in the mind. And part of tending to what we call climate collapse, reckoning with that existential dread, happens right here. You know, it's as intimate and challenging and immediate as releasing delusion in your own mind. It's what happens when I ask the question, what is my relationship to water? Some people will say we can't get stuck in grief. We have to move on and take action, solve the problem. But for me, grief is one of the great helpers. You know, grief is a complete, full-throated ecological response. It is taking action. Grief is what it looks like when a healthy ecosystem is rebalancing itself. I could go on, but I see that we are close to time, and I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much for your attention and your presence today.